Good morning, everybody. Thanks for your patience there. We're making sure everything is good for online to make sure that that was working properly, because we know there are people at home who are watching today. I'm Pastor Dave Burkham. It's a privilege to be serving today. Thank you all for coming, and I think we'll have a wonderful time of encouraging each other and sharing some good memories and singing, praying. So let's begin with a word of prayer today. Father, we thank you for the love and grace that you give. Thank you for family. Thank you for love. Thank you for life. And today we give thanks for Robert Brown. Thank you for Bob's life, his love for family. Help us, Father, to be an encouragement to each other today as we honor his memory. It's in Christ's name I pray. Amen. Small group, I hope you're ready to sing. I noticed there's some problems with the first verse in the bulletin, but I hope enough of you know it to get it right, even though there's a misprint there. Let's try singing together. Oh Lord my God, when I in awesome wonder consider all the worlds thy hands have made, I see the stars, I hear the rolling thunder, thy power throughout the universe display. Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee. How great thou art, how great thou art. Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee. How great thou art, how great thou art. When through the woods and forest glades I wander and hear the birds sing sweetly in the trees, when I look down from lofty mountain grandeur and hear the brook and feel the gentle breeze, then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee. How great thou art, how great thou art. Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee. How great thou art, how great thou
Good morning. I'll be reading from Psalm 8 this morning. Lord, O Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. You have set your glory in the heavens. Through the praise of children and infants, you have established a stronghold against your enemies, to silence the foe and the avenger. When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have set in place, what is mankind that you are mindful of them? Human beings that you care for them. You have made them a little lower than the angels and crowned them with glory and honor. You made them rulers over the works of your hands. You put everything under their feet, all flocks and herds and the animals of the wild, the birds in the sky and the fish in the sea, all that swim the path of the seas. Lord, O Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth.
Excuse me. Good morning, everybody. Before we get into telling you about Dad, I do want to just mention, Psalm 8 isn't necessarily usually a psalm that you would pick as a funeral song or a funeral psalm. And even the How Great Thou Art, that second verse, if you look at that second verse, and then what was said there in the psalm, my dad wasn't a really religious man, but he was a very spiritual man. And he loved to be outdoors because when he was outdoors, he was out in the creation and he's looking and seeing the creation. And that Psalm 8 is the psalmist saying, O Lord, how great thou art, or O Lord, how majestic are your works. And so that's why we chose that particular psalm as something to honor our dad. My dad was born July 14th, 1935 in Queens, New York. He spent his early years of his life in Flushing, New York, which is out on Long Island. His dad was trying to operate a flying school in New York, and if you think about it, here's the guy, he's trying to run a flying school during the middle of the Great Depression. But that's what he did. His dad had a passion for flying. One of the earliest memories that my dad had was back in 1938, there was a hurricane that came up the east coast of the United States and blew across Long Island. And so his dad has got this flying school with airplanes out there. This hurricane comes through and damaged a lot of the airplanes, and so his dad then spent a lot of time working on fixing the airplanes. But a lot of the engine parts had water in them, so his dad was bringing the engine parts home, sticking them in the oven, and baking them in the oven to get them to dry out. And apparently that worked because he continued on with the flying school. Sometime, and I'm not really sure about what exactly happened here, but sometime around the Second World War, they moved to Illinois for a while and then wound up moving up here to settle in Bloomington, where he finished out his school years, graduating from high school in 1953.
So after that, he joined the Army after high school, and he trained as a helicopter mechanic. He spent some time in Alaska and Greenland. After he finished his term in the Army, he tried college for a single semester at Winona State University, and he quickly realized that college was not for him. He'd have to take some books home and actually look at them. And so he didn't have the grades for it. He got an A in earth science, but everything else was a C or lower. He joined the Coast Guard after college and spent some time on an icebreaker out of Alaska. And then he returned to the command on the Ohio River and was based in Owensboro, Kentucky. That's where he met Nancy Niehaus on a blind date arranged by one of his shipmates and his girlfriend, a friend of Nancy's. They married on July 10th, 1961, and he had an instant family because with Nancy came me. He adopted me when I was 2.5 years old. The salary for a junior enlisted man in the Coast Guard at the time was not sufficient to support a family, and I was told on many occasions how they spent their last nickel going to Dairy Queen to buy me an ice cream cone. So he left the Coast Guard, came back to Minnesota, and started to work with the Army Corps of Engineers as a lock and dam operator on the Mississippi River. He was first at Lock and Dam number 1 in Minneapolis, and then later he transferred down to Lock and Dam number 2 in Hastings. All right. Did I skip? Nope, you're good.
All right, so then I was born in 1962, and not too long after that, Paul came along in 1965. When we first moved, or when the family first was here in Minnesota, we lived in Eaton Trailer Park, which still exists over off of Cedar Avenue. But with a growing family, they needed to get into something a little bit bigger, so they bought a small house on 4 acres of land off of Galaxy Avenue in 1966. At that time, when we moved into the house, we had a small house on a gravel road. 55 years later, when we moved them out of the house, they had a small house on a little bit smaller lot with a 4-lane road in front of them with a lot of traffic. The hill that we used to go sliding on is now McAndrews, headed up towards the zoo. But when we moved there, and as kids growing up, we were on a gravel road with plum trees and berry bushes and stuff on the side of the road, which was really nice. Sometime in the 1970s, he decided he needed to add on to the house. So he took on the project to build half of the house that they have. He built that with us kids and other kids from the neighborhood helping him. Like when we needed to lift the wall, we'd get all the neighborhood kids together to lift the wall up. Dad always had a woodworking shop. From the time they moved into the house, he always had a woodworking shop. It was in the barn at first, and then in what we called the little building, which he expanded and became his shop, which eventually also moved into the basement of the house. As he built the house, he didn't just build the house, he built all the cabinets that were in the house, so all the kitchen cabinets, all the bathroom cabinets, and a lot of the furniture. In fact, the furniture that they had in the apartment here towards the end of their life was furniture that Dad had built. He taught me and Paul both how to do woodworking, and for me in particular, he taught me how to use a lathe. He had a shopsmith that had a lathe on it, and I've still got a couple of the projects that I made as a kid. And then I've rekindled that for my 50th birthday. My wife gave me a nice lathe, so that's something that I have from him even to this day. He wasn't afraid to take on large projects like building a house. He also wasn't afraid to repair anything. He could repair just about anything, including his cars. He did most of the work on his cars, including one story we've got of him. He needed to fix the fenders on a VW Bug that he had because he had rear-ended a school bus. And you might wonder, how do you rear-end a school bus? Jan asked him, how did you miss a school bus? He said, well, it's because I was looking at the train. So he's watching a train and drove into the back end of a school bus, but he damaged the fenders on the car, so he needed to fix that. Somehow he found a pair of fenders in the ditch, which VW never changed the design on their cars for years, so whatever years those were, they worked on the car that he had, so then he had a VW with mismatched fenders for a while.
So it was really nice to have someone who could fix just about anything, and of course there was a downside to that too, because every time we asked for something that we wanted that was new, Dad's answer was, well, we don't have to buy that, I can fix it. And so, or make it or whatever, and so that was great, but then we waited and waited and waited and finally got whatever it was that we were asking when he would find the time to actually make it. He also smoked in his younger years, and we used to bug him continuously to quit. And he finally said that, if I could keep him in freshly baked chocolate chip cookies, then he would quit smoking. So I never baked so many chocolate chip cookies in my life. He gained about 15 pounds too, but at any rate, I baked a lot of chocolate chip cookies, and I haven't baked any chocolate chip cookies since. He also worked different shifts at the lock, and he'd take his lunch every single day. And every day he had 2 PB&Js, a thermos of coffee, and then whatever else he could find around the house to make his lunch. So one day he asked me to make him a ham sandwich with a little bit of mustard. So I made him a ham sandwich, put it in with his PB&Js. He came home from work then and told me that I asked for a ham sandwich with mustard, not a mustard sandwich with ham. So needless to say, I didn't have to make any more sandwiches after that either. So He was very involved with us kids as we were growing up. We got involved in 4-H, Dad got involved in 4-H. So he was volunteered to be a leader. And he did everything from making ring barriers for the dog project, which consisted of ice cream cone buckets with cement and a wooden dowel with holes drilled in it for strings. And that all came out of their own pocket. And of course, we didn't have a lot of extra money, but they made it work, so we had ring barriers for our dog project. And then he also helped with what they called a bicycle rodeo, and he spent the entire day helping kids fix their bikes so that they could participate safely in the bicycle rodeo. We also had a pony named Harvey. He was a Shetland pony, and he was an ornery little thing. But I was showing Harvey at the county fair in the pony and cart division. and we didn't have a horse trailer. So Dad followed me all the way from Apple Valley to Farmington in the car while I drove the pony and cart along the road. Yeah, it was a long trip. He also attended our band concerts and plays whether he wanted to or not. I'm sure there were many occasions when he would have rather have been out canoeing. We spent a lot of time going on summer vacations where we'd go camping. We'd either go on a road trip to Kentucky to visit family, or we'd do a lot of camping in William O'Brien State Park. He also worked rotating shifts, so on a lot of those summer days we got to spend at Lake Nokomis. And we'd pack a picnic lunch, and it didn't matter if it was morning or afternoon or early evening, we would end up at Lake Nokomis. And he had built a Sunfish sailboat and taught all three of us kids how to sail on Lake Nokomis. So Lake Nokomis has a lot of memories for us.
So when he, excuse me, when he was a kid, a lot of their family trips were fishing trips. And you'll see in some of the pictures out there a lot of stringers of fish that he caught as a kid growing up. He told me one time that he enjoyed the fishing trips, but after a while he started to realize that the reason he enjoyed the fishing trips was the boat ride to get out to where the fish were at and back. So he decided, we'll just skip the fishing part and just make the boat ride the thing to do. And so as a kid, the first canoe that he bought was one that we nicknamed Old Lead Bottom. This is a fiberglass canoe, probably a 1960s design, so it's thick fiberglass. It had this, solid fiberglass seats in it. The thing weighed something in excess of 100 pounds. Don't know how much it weighed, but well in excess of 100 pounds. We took that on a trip on the Vermilion River, and if any of you, some of you I'm sure have canoed the Vermilion River, there's a lot of snags and stuff, and can imagine dragging an 18-foot, 130, 140-pound boat over these snags. After that trip, there was a 3-day trip. After that trip, he decided this thing needs to lose some weight, so he started modifying it, cut the seats out, shaved some weight, and got that so that Old Lead Bottom was a little bit better to handle. Around that time is when I think he found the Minnesota Canoe Association. He joined that, got their plans for the Explorer. At the time they had the Guide and the Explorer. He got the Explorer plans and built his first wood strip boat out of redwood. And that set him on a path where the last number I remember him telling me is that he made something along the order of about 78 different boats. And so he built that Explorer out of redwood. I helped him on his shopsmith to cut he had 1x10s that he had bought and then cut that up into the strips, and that was the strips that were used to make that boat. There were some things about the way the Explorer handled that he didn't necessarily care for, so he decided just modify the design. And so for him, that meant he got himself a roll of drafting paper. He got some kind of a long rod that he could use to do curves. He made himself some weights to hold those rods in place, and he just started changing the design. And that got him into where he started changing all kinds of different designs or coming up with his own designs. He knew enough about how boats are supposed to handle and what made a boat turn or turn easily or track straight or whatever, so he started doing his own designs. And he would just design a boat. When he got the design to where he wanted it, he'd make one. And if he liked it, he'd keep it for a while. If he didn't like it, he'd put it out in the front yard with a sign on it, and somebody would come by and buy it. So that's how he managed to go through all these different designs. When redwood became hard to get, because redwood is kind of scarce, he switched over to cedar and started making all his boats out of cedar. And he spent so much time building boats and exposed to the cedar, he developed a sensitivity to the cedar where he couldn't breathe very well. And so that's not going to stop him. So we had an old shop vac. He took the shop vac and made himself a forced air hood out of that thing so that he could continue to do working on the boats. We have a picture someplace, I think, of him with a vacuum cleaner on his head out working on his boats. So after the strip boats, for a while he was just doing canoes. Then he decided he wanted to build a kayak, so he made a strip kayak. Then he decided that cedar strip isn't the best way to necessarily do kayaks, and he switched over to stitch and glue. And then he got into stitch and glue rowboats and stitch and glue sailboats and everything. Like I said, he totaled out somewhere around 78 different boats that he built, We still have a few of them. A lot of them he sold, and I know some of them, Dr. Cure, you've got one that he made. I don't know, some of the rest of you might have some of them that he made as well. But he went through and made at least 78 different boats of all kinds, of different kinds.
We also had a lot of pets. So my mom always wanted to have pets, and Dad indulged her desire, and he took care of the pets, really. He did most of the cleaning of the stalls and loading of the hay in the hayloft and cleaning dog kennels and much more. Because we had so many different kinds of pets, we had everything from raccoon to ponies to rabbits and pigeons and dogs and all kinds of stuff. So because we had so many different varieties of animals, Dad named our little 4-acre hobby farm Brown's Menagerie. And you never knew when there might be some funky looking meat on the table, and it might be suddenly a rabbit or a pigeon had gone missing. So it wasn't uncommon to have chicken for dinner. And as I said, we also had that Shetland pony named Harvey, and Dad used to hook him up to that two-wheel cart, and in the wintertime, he would tie the toboggan to the back of it, and he'd take us on toboggan rides up and down our little road. And then we used to call it our half-horse-powered snowmobile. Having horses was expensive, and so to offset some of the cost of that, we boarded other people's horses, which simply meant that it was more work for us. But Dad never complained. We'd take a couple days every summer, and we'd have to buy hay and pull it up by pulley system into the attic. And he did it because he loved my mom. In later years, after we moved out of the house and they were on their own, they only had dogs. And then after Mom had her stroke and wasn't able to get around so much, Dad was the main person who cleaned up after the dog, so he was always the kennel boy.
Yep. Dad also liked bike riding, which is something that I love that he passed on to me. He taught me to ride on the gravel road out in front of our house. After Paul learned how to ride and got a little bit bigger, the three of us went on an overnight camping trip by bike from our house here in Apple Valley out to Welsh, Minnesota. We rode out to Hastings to the Lock and Dam and then down to the campground and then back in, or back the next day, which is a pretty long ride for, I might have been 10, Paul was maybe 6. So for, a 6-year-old to do, that would have been probably about a 40 or 50 mile loop that we rode. That was a long ride for us little kids, but we enjoyed it, and Dad enjoyed doing that with us. As an adult, me and my dad we did several different rides together on various trails around the state, or even down in Wisconsin, we did a couple of rides. Often I was pulling a trailer with my kids in it as me and my dad were chatting as we were going off doing the ride. In his later years, he took a couple of international bike trips, one of which was to the Netherlands, and his friend Kevin, who's here, hi Kevin, his friend Kevin helped him set this up, where he took a trip by himself to the Netherlands, and they were on a barge in the canal system that would take them around and then do day bike rides around. The thing that I find pretty funny about that, though, is that he took a trip to the Netherlands to go bike riding, and all the pictures that he came back with are pictures of boats. Another one of the international trips that he took was, again, with Kevin and his wife. Took a trip down to Baja, where a lot of gravel riding, hot weather. I don't know a lot about that trip myself, but I know Dad did enjoy that trip quite a lot.
One thing that he did say about that trip to Baja was that they had guacamole at every meal, and he does not like guacamole. And he did his bike riding well into his 80s, and he took a tumble, cracked his head, and even broke his helmet. And he went ahead and drove to Kentucky. My mom wanted to go visit her family, so he drove to Kentucky and back, and he was complaining of a headache, and he didn't complain of much at all. And so finally convinced him to literally get his head examined. And the hospital called and said, "You need to take an ambulance to Regents Hospital right away, as quickly as you can." And he said, "Okay, I'll drive, I'll be there in about an hour or so." And they said, no. You need to have get to the hospital as soon as you can. You have a head bleed. It needs to be taken care of right away. And he's like, well, okay, as soon as my son gets home from work, we'll be there. He ended up with a burr hole in his skull. And it's like, Dad, really? But that was so typical of him. So,
All right, he did also like to write, and he became fairly well known in canoeing circles and wrote several articles for a bunch of different magazines, always under the byline of Mississippi Bob. He was also invited to demonstrate different boat building techniques by the Minnesota Canoe Association. I know at least one time he was on a panel where they had a panel of people that were talking about different aspects of canoeing. His main aspect was talking about canoe in the water that's around you, where you're at, where you live, which is definitely a philosophy that he had, because all of you who know him know that he always had a canoe on the roof of his truck, and that was so that if he was driving someplace and there was some water that looked interesting, he could stop and get out and go canoe on that. Sorry, go canoe on that water, wherever that water happens to be.
So, like I said, he did like to write. If you look out, there's several different notebooks out there with some of his writings in them. But he was a horrible speller. And he'd ask me to prove his writing. And one thing I remember distinctly was he spelled cracker, K-R-K-R. I said, Dad, that's not how you, no. He said, that's not how you spell cracker. And he said, but it sounds like that. Thank goodness for spell check. So growing up, our friends were always welcome at our house. They could come and visit at any time. And it kind of became a tradition that on Friday nights, we'd have a bunch of friends over and we'd play Tripoli. John and Autumn, you guys remember that? And so one night, he was getting up to go work his midnight shift. He got up from his nap, he gathered up his stuff, he went to the door, and we said, Dad, just be careful, you know, how you back up and whatever, because there's a lot of cars out in the driveway. He's like, yeah, okay, fine. And about 2 minutes later, he comes back into the house and he says, who owns the white car out there? And my friend Tara said, I do, why? Well, he backed into her. Made a little, pretty good sized dent, actually. So then for Christmas that year, he received a bright red t-shirt with the words, Crash Lives on it from Tara. And so that t-shirt is still part of the family, and it gets passed around to anybody that whoever has the latest Crash gets the Crash t-shirt. And Lindsay actually had it for over a year because of COVID, but we'll say that she had it for over a year. But the person that had the Crash t-shirt the most was Dad. And we all know how much he enjoyed Christmas. He didn't. He hated the hype, hated it. And Mom, of course, loved it. So there was always a fight over how much Christmas decorations would get put up. And as the years went by and as they got older and whatever, the Christmas decorations dwindled and dwindled and dwindled till last year the only Christmas decoration that was in the house was the brass bell that you see out there with the Christmas bow on it. And he didn't even put up a tree on the table anymore. He also had, because of his love of Christmas, I gave him a Grinch t-shirt one year. He wore that the entire season, every Christmas. And when we moved them from their house into their assisted living, suddenly the t-shirt disappeared. And he accused my mom of throwing it out. And he complained about not having his Grinch t-shirt. I finally went out and bought him another one. So that was kind of his take on Christmas. One of our family traditions for many years was to get together on Friday nights and have dinner somewhere. So we would, and if the plan hadn't been made by Thursday where we were going to meet for dinner, then Dad was calling everybody and saying, hey, where are we going for dinner tomorrow? And usually we ended up at the same place, no matter how many times we tried to change it up. It was either the Oriental Buffet, Bonanza, when that was still around, or Pizza Ranch. Those were our three choices. Dad, don't you want to go someplace else? Yeah, let's go to Pizza Ranch. No. But anyways, Dad told things like it was. I mean, he didn't hold anything back. He said it like he saw it, whether it was right or wrong. And one night we were sitting at Pizza Ranch, I believe, and out of the clear blue, he calmly says, "Oh, by the way, I got a call from the FBI today." And it's like, wait, stop, what? And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "Why? Why are you getting a phone call from the FBI?" Well, he had written a letter to his congressperson, and it was in regards to an incident that had happened in Washington, D.C. And however he worded that letter caused the FBI to give him a little jingle. So, that would only come from our dad. He loved to travel, and we did take several family vacations where, like we flew to Mexico or went on a cruise or, did something really fun. But it was only my mom and dad that could be the ones that could be pulled aside at the airport, guaranteed every single time, because lo and behold, they looked like terrorists, of course. My mom in her wheelchair and my dad walking with his cane. But it never failed. They always got pulled over. And one time, he's getting back, he's trying to get his stuff back together, and I'm like, "Where's your passport?" I don't know. It's got to be around here somewhere. And, "Well, where's your belt?" "Well, I don't know. Where's your, So obviously we were missing a bin. So we're going to the agents and stuff, we're looking for a bin. Where's the, "Oh, there's nothing, we've gone through everything. There's no extra bins." And my mom's panicking. "We're not going to be able to go on vacation now, And so anyways, finally did find the bin with his passport and everything in it. And then we were able to go ahead and continue our trip. But then when we got to the cruise line to check in at the cruise line, my dad is the only one I know of that can lose his key from the time you board the gangplank to the entrance of the ship. Now, we're not talking a big, long area here, but he managed to lose his key. And then he also liked Mexican beer. He liked that Dos Equis. And one of our trips to Mexico, the waitress would come around, "What do you want to drink?" "Oh, I want Dos Equis." And then she'd come around, and I would like a Dos Equis. Finally, after about the third day of him asking for Dos Equis, the waitress said, "No, señor, no sexes, Dos Equis." He finally figured out how to say it.
Another one of his interests that he got from his dad was flying. As a young man, he did try to take flying lessons for a while, but flying is expensive, and so he wasn't able to complete that and get the license. He tried again about the time that I was in high school. This time he was flying out of Stanton Airport, but he also did a lot of flying with his dad. One of the stories he told me about flying with his dad was that one day they were out doing touch-and-go landings, and Dad is coming in, and he's landing in the middle of the runway just like he's supposed to. But Grandpa's telling him, "You're too far to the side, too far to the side, too far to the side." So on one of the next ones around, Dad landed way over on the side of the runway, and Grandpa was happy. So he realized that Grandpa's eyesight or something was not quite right any longer. But his eyesight wasn't quite right. But shortly after that is the time that Grandpa decided that it was time for him to sell his airplane. I think it was on his 80th birthday. He took his airplane up with the guy who was going to buy it and flew around for a little while, turned the keys over to him, and that guy left with the airplane then. But Dad never did get his pilot's license. He tried a couple of different times. He got several hours in, but he never did get the license. But he was very proud of Paul when Paul got his license. Paul, most of you know, he got his license while he had the brain cancer and everything. But he was able to go and get the license, and Dad flew, I don't know how many times with Paul. If Paul needed somebody to go fly with him, he could easily just call up Dad, and Dad would go with him.
So, Dad didn't always show how he felt, but he loved his family and his friends. He and Mom were married just shy of 59 years, and yes, they bickered back and forth. And sometimes I think the only thing that Mark remembers about my parents is, "Damn it, Bob." But they always made up for it, and you could tell how deep their love ran when you read some of the poems that my dad wrote over the years. He loved his bride. He valued his friendship very much, and those of you that were able to visit him at the end know it meant so much to him for you to do that. And I personally want to thank Bob for taking the time to visit and being such a good friend. My dad truly, truly valued your friendship, and I wanted to say thank you for being so supportive and helpful to me personally during the very difficult time. And I don't know how many of you will understand the reference from the old country song, but for me, he really was the dad he didn't have to be.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Lindsay. I'm one of the grandchildren. Sorry, Jan, you got me all sad. Yeah, you're doing so good. But I just have some fun memories from the grandchildren's perspective, so. We spent a lot of time with Grandma and Grandpa Brown growing up, and they were always very loving, and we looked forward to seeing them. Grandpa was always caring, and he showed up to family events always in his uniform of his jeans, his Pendleton shirt, and his suspenders, and usually a quirky undershirt. My favorite one was from Kelsey when we went to the mall, and he bought him that "This is my damn" shirt. And I had a picture of a dam in it. That one was bright yellow, so he wore that one all the time. He'd also usually be toting that silver thermos of Super Weak coffee with him. Corey reminded me of his orange cup yesterday and how he would kill you if you washed it because it had to be flavored, seasoned with the Super Weak coffee. Then the doctor made him switch to tea and then Diet Mountain Dew too. And I love Diet Mountain Dew now, so probably because of Grandpa. The only cell phone that he liked was that old school white flip phone. And he got really angry if you tried to upgrade him to any other technology beyond that. He'd always answer with "Bob speaking," and then he'd hang up with "over." And if he couldn't hear you, which was quite often, he'd always say "which" instead of "what," which I thought was funny. So he'd say "which" when he couldn't hear you. Grandpa was a little quirky, but in the best way. He always had so many bumper stickers on his car, on his truck, some of which we found embarrassing when we were younger, but now that I'm older, I understand more of his political and theological beliefs, which were kind of ahead of his time. He also had a big compost pile, which I thought was weird, but now appreciate him trying to make a positive impact on the environment. Kelsey took advantage once of his political views versus my dad's very polar opposite political views and switched their political signs on April Fools and then just let the chaos ensue. And just let them call and yell at each other until she admitted that she did that. Grandpa also did some other quirky things, like leave out his large Christmas decorations display for as long as possible in order to be the last neighbor with his decorations out. He somehow thought that was a good contest to win. And then he once told us about his letter complaining about the president or events in Washington, the FBI, that Jan talked about. Grandpa also told me how smart crows were and that he began feeding them in his neighborhood. And his neighbors weren't too happy about the huge nest of crows that started taking residence at their house. And I said, but now Mallory's doing that, so like grandfather, like granddaughter. Grandpa also spent a lot of time with us growing up, which was such a gift. I remember him taking me and Chris to the Aquatennial in those, the boat races made out of milk jugs. I remember that was really cool. And then we also went on glider rides with him multiple times. He, of course, is well known for his beautiful handcrafted boats and canoes, and he loved us so much that he built us kind of mini canoes and boats to use with him as we grew up. He came to our house all the time to either work on projects or spend time with us. Grandma Brown, his wife, loved sports, and even though he didn't really care for them, he hosted way more sports, Vikings, Twins games with all of us than I could ever count, eating Taco Bell soft shell packs or Cub pizzas that we'd bring over to his house. Of course, no onions on anything for Grandpa. Even if you put it in something and it dissolved, he could still figure out that there's onions in it. He preferred beans and weenies instead, and he made those for us all the time growing up. And if you ask Kelsey, she'll even sing you the bean song later today. Our family is a bit notorious for our family dinners, usually taking place on Friday nights that Jan had talked about. Most likely a buffet, one of those 3 options. Old Country buffet too. Yes, why not one? Mostly because we could sit there and talk for hours without feeling like we had to leave or be disturbed. Grandpa, being the caring grandpa that he was, would make sure us grandkids had vegetables on our plate for dinner. Grandpa asked Corey at Bonanza to get something green on his plate when he went up to the buffet. So Corey came back with some green Jell-O, and admitting defeat, Grandpa was like, okay, you got me. Yeah. And then for as long as I can remember, Grandpa had a Ford Ranger with a topper with his canoe, and he listened to the classical music station. He loved to remind Kelsey of when she would sit in the middle seat of the truck and kick it out of gear while he was driving. Grandpa, being the caring individual that he was, let me borrow his truck one time when my car was being repaired and I had to go to work. It was super foggy leaving on Galaxy, and I may or may not have hit a goose with it. Chris, yeah, I already have the shirt, so I just keep taking it. And then Chris is now the proud owner of that truck, so it stays in the Brown family. We went on a lot of family vacations growing up. We went to Disney, on a Caribbean cruise, to Mexico many times, Kentucky, and other road trips across the country. I remember Grandpa taking Spanish lessons when I was young, so I just assumed he fluently spoke Spanish. But really what he knew was dos cervezas, por favor, for when we went to Mexico. And then Grandpa would somehow always lose his passport or room key between the gate and getting on the flight or getting to the room. But we'd figure it out and we'd have fun once we got through those stressful moments. Kelsey reminded me of a funny story when we were on a road trip and Grandpa was driving and Grandma was asleep in the back of the van. He missed his turn, and rather than just make a U-turn, he jumped the median and tossed Grandma all over the back of the van with her screaming her infamous, "Bob!" So Grandpa was really the best grandpa, and all of us grandkids are so lucky to have so many fond memories with him growing up. We love you and miss you very much. And to end this remembrance in the most grandpa way possible, over.
God saw he was getting tired, and a cure was not to be. So he put his arms around him and whispered, "Come with me." With tearful eyes we watched him suffer and saw him fade away. Although we love him dearly, we could not make him stay. A golden heart stopped beating, hard-working hands to rest. God broke our hearts to prove to us he only takes the best. Although his heart stopped beating, his love will always remain. His absence puts upon our hearts a very heavy strain. For now he is in a place of everlasting rest. We just have to understand that God, he only takes the best.
This is my Father's world, and to my listening ears, all nature sings, and round me rings the music of the spheres. This is my Father's world. I rest me in the thought of shepherds their carols raise. The morning light, the lily white, declare the Maker's praise. This is my Father's world. Oh, let me ne'er forget that though the wrong seems off so strong, sorry, He is the ruler yet. Let's try that chorus again. I'll try to get my trifocals right. This is my Father's world. He shines in all that's fair. In the rustling grass, I hear Him pass. He speaks to me everywhere. This is my Father's world. Oh, let me ne'er forget that though the wrong seems off so strong, God is the ruler yet. This is my Father's world. Why should my heart be sad? The Lord is King, let the heavens ring. God is the earth be glad. This time I'm going to ask if the honor guard, we're going to change the order a little bit and ask if the honor guard could come forward and present the flag. Well, this morning when I met with the family just prior to the service, I was greeted by someone who said, "We have to stop meeting like this." And that's a reference to the fact that I've been able to be, there we go. That's a reference to the fact that I've been able to be been honored to be a part of a lot of Brown family events. I was a little late for Mallory and Zach's wedding. I just showed up in town in time to get invited. But Lindsay made it to yours. And of course, the 50th anniversary shindig of Bob and Nancy, that was great. And Paul's funeral, and then last year, Nancy's funeral. And every one of these big life events, look how big, it was just a wedding invitation a while ago, and now look at these kids, look, all around us we see indications that time is slipping further and further. You go, and it's fun to look at those pictures, and kind of funny to look at some of those pictures because we see what we looked like in some of those old pictures. There's all kinds of evidence that time is moving relentlessly, and we have limited time, numbered days. There is wisdom in numbered days, and I can just hear, if Bob were here, saying we have limited time, so keep it short, Pastor. I forgot to mention, too, that when Nancy first started coming to church when we were at the other building, she wanted to talk to me. She was serious about, I want to get this thing, my faith, figured out, and I got to baptize her, too. So there's probably more Brown events that I can't remember exactly. But many a Sunday when Nancy was coming to church, not every Sunday, but many a Sunday, Bob would be in tow. I don't know if that's the right word, but I was pretty sure he was there because she was making him be there or something. Anyway, and not once did he complain about my sermons being too short. Not once. In fact, I think maybe a time or two where I managed to keep them kind of brief, he probably winked at me and said, "That was a good one today." That's a good one today. So, wisdom from Psalm 90. In honor of Bob, I'm going to keep it short. Psalm 90 is one of the oldest psalm, maybe the oldest psalm in the book of Psalms. It was written not by King David, it was written by Moses. And written in the wilderness as Moses was leading the children of Israel through the wilderness. And Moses, those of you who know your Bible know that many people died in the wilderness on that trip. So Pastor Moses did a lot of funerals. So it's not surprising that he would write a psalm that says, "Teach us to number our days." I like not thinking about my days being numbered. I like not thinking about time being short and life coming to an end. If you want to really wreck a party, just show up and remind everybody how short life is. But in fact, one time I had a barber who I lamented to him that how my hair was getting so thin. This was back good 10, 15 years ago. And I was like 50 years old, and he said to me, "Oh, no, you're doing okay. Most guys, what they have when they're 50, they get to keep to the end." And I now realize that was marketing. That wasn't actually science. That was, you think about it, a barber doesn't keep customers by telling them their hair's going away. So sometimes we like to ignore the sign that our days are numbered and that time is ticking, but we shouldn't. The psalmist being Moses says, "Lord, you've been our dwelling place throughout all generations. Before the mountains were born, or you brought forth the whole world, from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. You turn people back to dust, saying, 'Return to dust, you mortals.' God, 1,000 years in your sight are like a day that has just gone by, or like a watch in the night. You sweep people away in the sleep of death. They are like the new grass of the morning. In the morning, it springs up fresh and new, but by evening, it is dry and withered. So the first little point of wisdom from Psalm 90 is this: lives are short. And the psalmist says, look to the eternal. When your life is limited, look to the one whose life is unlimited. Look to the eternal God. In the New Testament, James says, what is your life? It is a vapor. Just think if you had a little vapor, gone. Life is short. Look to the eternal. And then a couple more verses. Our days may come to 70 years or 80. If our strength endures, yet the best of them are but trouble and sorrow, for they quickly pass and we fly away. Relent, Lord, how long will it be? Have compassion on your servants. When I see Moses say that our lives are not just short, but they are filled with trouble and sorrow, I'm not going to argue with that. You've probably all encountered enough trouble and sorrow. You'd be okay if you didn't get any more. And yet, we love our lives and we cling to our lives because there are so many blessings that outweigh the troubles and sorrow. But the second little bit of wisdom from this psalm is lives are challenging. So we should look to the eternal God. Our life is short, so we should look to God. Our lives are challenging, so we should look to God. And then last, a couple more verses here. Moses says, O God, satisfy us in the morning with your unfailing love, that we may sing for joy and be glad all our days. Make us glad for as many days as we have seen trouble. May your deeds be shown to your servants, your splendor to their children. May the favor of the Lord our God rest on us. Yes, establish the work of our hands for us, God. Establish the work of our hands. Life is short. We should look to God. Life can be challenging. We should look to God. I like this last one, though. Life can be satisfying. We should look to God and give him thanks. Several years ago, I was speaking at a youth camp, and to my surprise, while I was in the middle of talking to the kids, coming in the back door of the building, I could see her walk in with someone that I hadn't seen for maybe 15 years. I had a good talk to for a long time. Her dad and my dad were good friends. She was, we're kind of like cousins, you know, because our dad acted like brothers. And so we knew each other from childhood, but we hadn't seen each other for a long time. And I knew that she was only, you know, like maybe 50-ish. And I knew that she had lost her husband tragically to an illness at a young age. And it was the first time I had a chance to talk to her, and she said, I said, how are you doing? She goes, well, it's pretty devastating. She goes, I was kind of upset for quite a while. And she said, but one day I was praying, and I was kind of complaining. And she said, I just felt like God said, well, was there anything good about the time you and your husband had together? I mean, is the pain so much that you wouldn't like to have any of those years together? Would you rather just that you'd not met him and not had the years you had? And she said, as she prayed, she said, that puts it in perspective. I would take any amount of pain for the amount of joy that I've had. Life is short, yes. Life is challenging, yes. But life can be very satisfying. I mean, when you get that boat just right, that it goes the right speed in the right, that's pretty neat. That's pretty neat. When you find a couple of fenders in a ditch that just happen to fit your car, come on. It's not all bad. It's a blessing to know Bob as a dad, as a friend, as a grandpa. I heard a lot of words that made sense to me. Quirky, character. He was all that, huh? Let's give thanks for the blessing of knowing him, and let's pray that we would be a blessing to each other. Father, thank you so much for this time together to remember, to celebrate. Father, we pray also, though, that in this time of grief, that we would gain wisdom by remembering that our lives, while short and challenging, can find satisfaction in you. Give us the wisdom to turn our eyes toward you. It's in Christ's name I pray. Amen. That's also going to serve as the prayer before our lunch today. So I'm going to ask you to please stand, and we'll let the family, we'll dismiss the family first, and then we'll go right to our lunch time. And just feel free to jump right in. Mike, go ahead and lead the family out. Oh, okay. Oh, really?